What exactly are those supposed to be on your feet, Sophia? Mrs. Evelyn Hartford's voice cut through the fourth-grade classroom like a blade, stopping every conversation mid-sentence. 28 pairs of eyes turned toward Sophia Reyes, who stood frozen in the doorway clutching a worn backpack against her chest, her dark eyes wide with the instant recognition that she'd just become the target of something cruel. Sophia's gaze dropped to her feet, where she wore what could generously be called shoes, carefully crafted constructions of cardboard, fabric scraps, and what looked like pieces of an old leather jacket, held together with precise stitching and an artistry that spoke of hours of painstaking work. "They're my shoes, Mrs. Hartford," Sophia said quietly, her voice barely audible above the snickers that had already begun rippling through the classroom. "Those aren't shoes, dear. Those are." Mrs. Hartford paused, her lips curving into the kind of smile that never reached the eyes, "Craft projects that belong in the art room, not on your feet in my classroom." Sophia's cheeks flushed red, but she lifted her chin with a dignity that should have shamed every adult in the room. "My mother made them for me. Your mother needs to learn the difference between appropriate school attire and whatever this is." Mrs. Hartford gestured dismissively at Sophia's feet, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years molding young minds and had forgotten that those minds came attached to hearts that could break. "Perhaps you should ask your parents to invest in real shoes instead of whatever charity case situation this represents." The classroom fell silent except for muffled laughter from Derek Winters, whose designer sneakers cost more than Sophia's family spent on groceries in a month. Sophia's hands tightened on her backpack straps, and for a moment, something fierce and protective flashed in her eyes. "They're not charity," Sophia said, her voice stronger now. "My mom spent 3 weeks making them special, just for me. She used pieces from her old jacket and fabric from her sewing box, and she stayed up late every night working on them because your family can't afford proper footwear." Mrs. Hartford interrupted, her tone suggesting this was somehow shameful rather than heartbreaking. "Sophia, I understand that everyone comes from different circumstances, but there are standards we maintain in this classroom." Sophia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "She made them because she's sick, and she wanted to give me something beautiful before." "Before what?" Mrs. Hartford's impatience was palpable. "Before she goes to the hospital for her surgery next week," Sophia whispered. The laughter died completely, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that pressed against the walls like a living thing. Mrs. Hartford's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been regret, but it was quickly replaced by the rigid authority of someone who'd committed too deeply to cruelty to back down gracefully. "Well," Mrs. Hartford said, clearing her throat, "that's very thoughtful of your mother, Sophia, but sentiment doesn't change dress code policies. You'll need to call home and have someone bring you appropriate shoes, or you'll spend the day in the principal's office. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description, *. Sophia stood in the doorway for another moment, her small frame somehow radiating more dignity than the woman behind the teacher's desk. "Mrs. Hartford, my mom can't come to school today. She's at her dialysis appointment, and my dad is at work, and there's no one else to." "Then I suppose you'll be visiting Principal Morgan's office," Mrs. Hartford said with finality. "I'm sure he'll have some spare shoes in the lost and found that would be more appropriate than this." But Sophia didn't move toward the principal's office. Instead, she walked to her desk in the back corner of the room, her handmade shoes making soft, almost musical sounds against the linoleum floor. The other students watched her with a mixture of pity and fascination, as if witnessing something they didn't fully understand but knew was significant. "Sophia," Mrs. Hartford's voice was sharp with authority, challenged, "I said you need to go to the office." "I heard you," Sophia replied quietly, settling into her seat and pulling out her notebook. But I'm not going. A ripple of shock went through the classroom. Sophia Reyes had never challenged authority, never spoken back, never caused trouble. She was the quiet girl who helped other students with their math, who shared her lunch with anyone who forgot theirs, who stayed after school to help clean erasers without being asked. "Excuse me." Mrs. Hartford's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Sophia looked up from her notebook, and her eyes held a strength that seemed to come from someplace deep and unshakable. These shoes were made with love by someone who's fighting for her life. They're the most beautiful thing I own, and I'm not ashamed of them. If you want to send me to the office for wearing something my mother made with her own hands while she's sick, then you can call them yourself. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable, broken only by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside, confident, measured steps that suggested someone important approaching. Mrs. Hartford opened her mouth to respond, but the classroom door swung open before she could speak. "Mrs. Hartford. I apologize for interrupting, but I'm looking for Sophia Reyes. I understand she's in your 4th grade class." The man in the doorway was tall and distinguished, wearing a suit that suggested authority but with kind eyes that immediately surveyed the room, taking in the tension, the uncomfortable silence, and Sophia sitting at her desk with tears she refused to shed. "Mayor Rodriguez," Mrs. Hartford said, her voice suddenly bright with forced enthusiasm. "What a wonderful surprise." "Yes, Sophia is right there in the back. Sophia, Mayor Rodriguez is here to see you." But Mayor Rodriguez wasn't looking at Sophia. His eyes were fixed on her feet, where the handmade shoes sat beneath her desk. His expression was changing, from polite official interest to something approaching shock, then recognition, then a complex mixture of emotions that seemed to encompass joy, disbelief, and profound gratitude. "Those shoes," he said quietly, stepping into the classroom and letting the door close behind him. "Sophia, where did you get those shoes?" Sophia looked up at him with confusion and residual hurt from Mrs. Hartford's attack. "My mom made them for me." "Your mother made them?" Mayor Rodriguez moved closer, his voice filled with wonder. "Sophia, what's your mother's name?" "Isabella Reyes. But everyone calls her Bella." Sophia's voice was cautious now, uncertain why the mayor seemed so interested in her shoes when her teacher had just spent 10 minutes explaining how inappropriate they were. Mayor Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, staring at Sophia's feet with an expression that made Mrs. Hartford shift uncomfortably behind her desk. "Mrs. Hartford," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight that made the teacher straighten reflexively, "perhaps you could step into the hallway with me for a moment?" "Of course, Mayor Rodriguez." "Sophia, we'll continue our discussion about appropriate footwear when I return." But as Mrs. Hartford reached the classroom door, Mayor Rodriguez's voice stopped her cold. "Actually, Mrs. Hartford, I think it's important for everyone to hear what I'm about to say." He turned to face the full classroom, his eyes moving from student to student before settling on Sophia. Because Sophia's shoes, those beautiful, carefully crafted shoes that someone in this room apparently considers inappropriate, just solved one of the biggest problems our city has faced in years. Mrs. Hartford's face went pale. "I'm sorry, what?" 2 months ago, our municipal charity, the organization that provides emergency assistance to families in crisis, was facing closure due to budget cuts. We needed a way to raise funds quickly, or we'd have to stop helping families like Sophia's. Mayor Rodriguez's voice was gaining strength, filling the classroom with authority that made Mrs. Hartford's earlier performance seem petty and small. "Someone submitted a design to our fundraising auction. A shoe design. The most beautiful, innovative approach to sustainable footwear I'd ever seen." Sophia was staring at him now, her notebook forgotten. The design sold for $50,000 to a manufacturer who wanted to create an entire line based on the concept. "It saved our charity, Sophia." It saved the program that's been helping your mother with her medical expenses. The classroom was dead silent. The design was submitted anonymously, Mayor Rodriguez continued, but it was signed with a single name, Bella. Sophia's hand went to her mouth, tears finally spilling over. My mom. Your mother, Sophia, is an artist. A designer. A woman whose creativity and skill have not only created something beautiful for her daughter but have helped save an entire program that serves hundreds of families in our community. Mayor Rodriguez looked directly at Mrs. Hartford, who seemed to be shrinking into herself with each word. I came here today to honor Sophia for her community service project, the reading program she started for younger students. But it seems I've arrived at exactly the right moment to learn something important about the values we teach in our schools. Sophia stood slowly, her handmade shoes taking on an entirely different meaning in the sudden silence of the classroom. Sophia, Mayor Rodriguez said gently, your mother's design isn't just beautiful, it's revolutionary. She's created a way to make functional, durable footwear from recycled materials that could change how we think about sustainable fashion. But Mrs. Hartford said they were inappropriate, Sophia said quietly. The only thing inappropriate here, Mayor Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, is judging someone's worth by their circumstances instead of their character. As the words settled over the classroom like a benediction, Sophia realized that her worst moment, standing in the doorway being mocked for wearing shoes made with love, was about to become something she'd never expected. It was about to become the moment that changed everything. Mayor Rodriguez knelt beside Sophia's desk, examining her shoes with the reverence usually reserved for museum artifacts. The classroom remained frozen in stunned silence, 28 fourth graders processing the impossible reversal they just witnessed, their classmates' source of humiliation transformed into something miraculous. Sophia, Mayor Rodriguez said gently, could you tell me more about how your mother made these? The technique, the materials she used. Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, still struggling to believe that the shoes she'd been ashamed of moments ago were now being praised by the most important person she'd ever met. Mom has this special way of cutting the patterns, Sophia said quietly, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about something she loved. She draws them out on newspaper first, then traces them onto the cardboard. But she doesn't just use any cardboard, she finds the kind that's strong but flexible, like from appliance boxes. Mrs. Hartford stood by the blackboard, her face cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light, embarrassment, anger, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. And the stitching? Mayor Rodriguez asked, genuinely fascinated. She learned it from her grandmother in El Salvador. Abuela taught her that every stitch should be like a prayer, strong enough to hold up under any storm. Sophia's eyes lit up as she spoke about her mother. Mom says that when you make something with your hands, you put a piece of your soul into it. That's why these shoes will never fall apart, no matter how far I walk in them. From across the room, Derek Winters raised his hand tentatively. Sophia, are you saying your mom is like, famous now? I don't know about famous, Mayor Rodriguez interjected with a warm smile, but she's certainly made a significant impact on our community. The manufacturer who bought her design wants to meet with her about creating an entire sustainable footwear line. Sophia's jaw dropped. Really? Really? The company believes your mother's approach could revolutionize how we think about fashion and environmental responsibility. Mayor Rodriguez stood, his expression growing more serious. Sophia, there's something else you should know. The charity your mother's design saved. It's the same program that's been helping cover your family's medical expenses. The weight of this revelation settled over Sophia like a warm blanket. Her mother, while fighting her own illness, had created something that would help other families facing the same struggles. Mr. Mayor, came a small voice from the front of the room. Emma Chen, the class president, raised her hand nervously. Does this mean Sophia's mom is going to be rich? Mayor Rodriguez's expression grew thoughtful. Emma, that's an excellent question, and it brings up something important. The $50,000 from the auction has already been used to keep the charity running. But the ongoing royalties from the shoe design, that money will go directly to your mother, Sophia. Mrs. Hartford, who had been suspiciously quiet during this exchange, suddenly stepped forward. Mayor Rodriguez, while this is all very inspiring, I'm concerned about the disruption to our learning environment. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in the principal's office? Something in her tone made Mayor Rodriguez pause. He studied Mrs. Hartford with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years reading people's motivations. Mrs. Hartford, I'm curious about something. How long have you known Sophia? This is her second year in my class. She was held back last year due to attendance issues. Sophia's face flushed red. I wasn't held back because I didn't try. I missed school because Mom was in the hospital, and I had to take care of my little brother, Anne. Sophia, Mrs. Hartford said sharply, we don't need to air our personal business in front of. Actually, Mayor Rodriguez interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that made Mrs. Hartford stop mid-sentence. I think Sophia's personal business is exactly what we need to understand here. He turned back to Sophia with encouraging eyes. Tell me about taking care of your brother. Miguel is 6. When Mom has her dialysis appointments, someone needs to watch him because Dad works construction and can't take time off. Sophia's voice was matter-of-fact, as if caring for a younger sibling while managing school and a sick mother was perfectly normal. I help him with his homework and make sure he eats dinner and gets to bed on time. And how often does this happen? 3 times a week. Sometimes 4, if Mom has extra appointments. Mayor Rodriguez did the math in his head, his expression growing increasingly grave. This 9-year-old girl was essentially functioning as a caregiver while trying to maintain her own education. Mrs. Hartford, he said quietly, were you aware of Sophia's family situation when you recommended she repeat 4th grade? Mrs. Hartford's discomfort was palpable. Mayor Rodriguez, I don't think it's appropriate to discuss confidential academic decisions in front of the entire class. You're right, Mayor Rodriguez agreed, but his tone suggested he was far from finished with this conversation. Sophia, would you be comfortable sharing how you started the reading program for younger students? That's actually why I came here today, to honor your community service. Sophia's eyes widened. You came here for me. The principal nominated you for the Mayor's Youth Leadership Award. Apparently, you've been volunteering at the community center, helping kindergartners and first graders with their reading skills. When I'm there waiting for Mom's appointments, I noticed some of the little kids were struggling with their books. So I started helping them. How long have you been doing this? Since the beginning of the school year. Maybe longer. Mrs. Hartford's expression had grown increasingly strained during this conversation, and Mayor Rodriguez noticed. Mrs. Hartford, I'm wondering if you could help me understand something. Sophia clearly demonstrates leadership, compassion, and academic ability. She's functioning at a level that many adults would find challenging. Yet she's repeating 4th grade. Academic performance isn't just about ability, Mayor Rodriguez. It's about consistency, attendance, meeting deadlines. It's about understanding that a 9-year-old child who's caring for her family while maintaining volunteer work and helping younger students might need support rather than punishment. The tension in the room was growing thick. Other students were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something significant, not just praise for Sophia, but a challenge to authority they'd never seen before. Mayor Rodriguez, Mrs. Hartford said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, I appreciate your concern for Sophia, but I think you're missing some important context about this situation. What context would that be? Mrs. Hartford glanced around the classroom, clearly uncomfortable with having this conversation in front of students, but committed to her position. Sophia's family has been, problematic from the beginning. Multiple requests for special accommodations, complaints about homework policies, suggestions that we modify our standards to accommodate their circumstances. Mrs. Hartford's voice was gaining strength, as if she were finally able to voice frustrations she'd been holding back. At some point, we have to maintain academic standards regardless of personal situations. The classroom fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, charged with anger and disbelief. Mrs. Hartford, Sophia said quietly, her voice shaking but determined, we never complained about anything. We never asked for special treatment. The only thing my mom ever asked was if I could turn in my book report a day late because she was in surgery and I was taking care of Miguel. And that's exactly the kind of excuse-making that. It's not an excuse. Sophia's voice cracked with emotion. It's my life. It's my family. And maybe if you understood that families like mine are doing the best we can, you wouldn't be so mean about it. The word mean hung in the air like an accusation, and Mayor Rodriguez saw Mrs. Hartford's face flush red. Sophia, Mrs. Hartford said sharply, you will not speak to me in that tone. Mrs. Hartford. Mayor Rodriguez's voice cut through the rising conflict with quiet authority. I think we need to step outside and continue this conversation privately. But before Mrs. Hartford could respond, the classroom door opened again, and Principal Morgan entered with a concerned expression. Mayor Rodriguez, I apologize for interrupting, but there's been a development that you need to know about. What kind of development? Principal Morgan glanced nervously at Mrs. Hartford, then at Sophia, then back at the mayor. We just received a call from the district office. Apparently, there's been some confusion about the charity auction you mentioned. Mayor Rodriguez frowned. What kind of confusion? According to the district's records, Mrs. Hartford submitted a design to your auction 2 months ago. A shoe design. She claimed it was student work that she was submitting on behalf of the school. The words hit the classroom like a physical blow. Sophia stared at Mrs. Hartford with dawning horror, while Mayor Rodriguez's expression shifted from confusion to cold understanding. Mrs. Hartford, Mayor Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, are you telling me that you submitted Isabella Reyes's design to our auction and claimed it as school property? Mrs. Hartford's face had gone completely white. There's been a misunderstanding. The design was created using school time and school materials. Mom made those shoes at home. Sophia's voice was filled with betrayal and disbelief. She worked on them every night after dinner. She used her own fabric and her own tools. Sophia had been drawing shoe designs during class time, Mrs. Hartford said desperately, grasping for justification. I confiscated several of her sketches because they were disrupting her learning. When I saw how marketable they were, I thought the school could benefit. You stole my mom's work, Sophia whispered, the full scope of the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. You took her designs and sold them and didn't tell anyone. Mayor Rodriguez's expression was thunderous. Mrs. Hartford, are you saying that you took original artwork created by Isabella Reyes, submitted it to our charity auction without her knowledge or consent, and allowed the city to sell it under the impression that it was school-generated intellectual property? The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Hartford stood frozen, caught in a web of deception that was unraveling in real time in front of 28 fourth graders who were learning a lesson about corruption they'd never forget. Where's the money? Sophia asked quietly, her voice carrying a pain that made several students start crying. The $50,000. Where did it go? Principal Morgan cleared his throat uncomfortably. According to our records, Mrs. Hartford reported that the funds would be used for classroom improvements and educational materials. Sophia looked around the classroom, at the same broken desks, the same outdated textbooks, the same peeling paint on the walls. There are no improvements, she said hollowly. Nothing's changed. Mrs. Hartford, Mayor Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the full weight of legal authority, "I think you need to call your union representative. Immediately." As the scope of Mrs. Hartford's betrayal became clear, Sophia realized that the teacher who had humiliated her for wearing shoes made with love had also stolen the very design that could change her family's life. The woman who was supposed to protect her had been stealing from her all along. And now, in front of her entire class, Sophia was learning that sometimes the people in positions of authority are the ones who hurt you the most. But she was also learning that truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's buried under layers of deception and abuse of power. The question was, what would happen to her family's future now that the theft had been exposed? And how many other families had Mrs. Hartford stolen from in her quest to benefit herself? Principal Morgan's hands shook as he scrolled through his tablet, reading information that seemed to drain the color from his face with each passing second. The classroom had fallen into a silence so profound that Sophia could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. "Mayor Rodriguez," Principal Morgan said quietly, "this situation is significantly worse than we initially thought." "How much worse?" Principal Morgan glanced at the students, then at Mrs. Hartford, who stood frozen against the blackboard like a cornered animal. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." Sophia's voice cut through the room with surprising strength. "If this is about my mom's work, if this is about money that was supposed to help sick people, then I want to hear it. Everyone should hear it." Mayor Rodriguez looked at Sophia with something approaching admiration. "Sophia's right. This theft has affected an entire community. We all deserve to know the truth." Principal Morgan took a deep breath. According to the district's financial records, Mrs. Hartford has submitted 12 different designs to various auctions and contests over the past 3 years. All of them were listed as student work or classroom projects created under her supervision. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Sophia felt her knees weaken. 12, she whispered. "The total amount she's collected is approximately $180,000. Mrs. Hartford's back was pressed against the blackboard now, her earlier authority completely evaporated. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "I enhanced those designs. I refined them. I made them marketable. Without my input, they would have been nothing more than children's doodles." "Whose designs?" Mayor Rodriguez's voice was steel wrapped in ice. "Various students over the years. Children whose families wouldn't have known how to properly monetize their talents." Sophia stared at Mrs. Hartford, understanding dawning like a terrible sunrise. "You've been stealing from kids for 3 years. I've been helping children whose families lack the resources to properly develop their potential. By taking their work and keeping the money." Sophia's voice was rising, fueled by a rage she'd never felt before. "My mom is sick. She needs surgery. That money could have." Sophia's voice broke as the full weight of the betrayal crashed over her. Her mother's design, the beautiful, innovative work that had taken weeks to perfect, had been stolen by the woman who was supposed to protect her. The $50,000 that could have covered medical expenses, could have given her family breathing room, could have meant her mother wouldn't have to choose between dialysis and rent money, all of it had been taken. "Sophia," Principal Morgan said gently, "there's something else you need to know." Sophia looked up at him through tears, not sure she could handle any more revelations. "Your mother's design wasn't the only one. Mrs. Hartford also submitted artwork by Marcus Williams. His family needed money for his father's cancer treatment. And Jennifer Park's jewelry designs. Her grandmother lost her house and needed help with the mortgage. Each name was another knife wound. These weren't abstract victims, these were kids Sophia knew, families in her neighborhood who were struggling just like hers. "Where's the money?" Sophia asked, her voice hollow with despair. If she collected $180,000, where did it go? Mrs. Hartford's silence was damning. Principal Morgan consulted his tablet again. According to bank records the district just obtained, the funds were deposited into an account registered to Evelyn Hartford Educational Consulting. She made a fake business. Derek Winters spoke for the first time since the mayor arrived, his voice filled with disbelief. It appears so. The consulting business lists Mrs. Hartford as the sole proprietor, offering services in talent development and creative monetization for underprivileged students. Sophia felt the room spinning around her. Mrs. Hartford hadn't just stolen from children, she'd created an entire false company to legitimize the theft, marketing herself as someone who helped poor kids while actually exploiting them. Mrs. Hartford, Mayor Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the full weight of legal authority, "You're under arrest for theft, fraud, and exploitation of minors." But before he could continue, Mrs. Hartford's composure finally snapped completely. "You think you understand what it's like," she screamed, her professional mask falling away to reveal something twisted and desperate underneath. "You think it's easy teaching these kids, dealing with their problems, their broken families, their constant excuses?" The students recoiled as if she'd struck them. "I've given 15 years of my life to this school. 15 years of dealing with children whose parents can't afford basic supplies, who come to school hungry, who need constant help with everything." Mrs. Hartford's voice was rising to a shriek. "I deserve compensation for the emotional labor of managing their chaos." "So you stole from them?" Sophia's voice was quiet but carried across the room like thunder. "I collected payment for services rendered. Those designs were nothing until I recognized their potential, until I refined them, until I made them worth something." Mayor Rodriguez stepped forward, his phone already out and recording. "Mrs. Hartford, you're confessing to systematic theft from children and families in crisis." "I'm confessing to being the only person in this school who understood how to turn tragedy into opportunity." Mrs. Hartford was completely unhinged now, 15 years of resentment pouring out in a torrent of self-justification. These families would have wasted those talents. They don't know how to navigate the business world, how to market creative work, how to trust the people who are supposed to protect their children, Sophia finished quietly. The words hit Mrs. Hartford like a slap. For a moment, her wild ranting stopped, and she stared at Sophia with something that might have been recognition of what she'd become. "Sophia," Mrs. Hartford said, her voice suddenly small, "you don't understand the pressures, the expectations. Teachers are expected to work miracles with no resources, no support. So you decided to steal from the kids who needed help the most." Before Mrs. Hartford could answer, the classroom door burst open and a woman Sophia didn't recognize rushed in, her professional attire and urgent expression suggesting she was someone important. "Mayor Rodriguez? I'm Detective Lisa Santos with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you immediately." "Detective Santos, can this wait? We're in the middle of..." "Sir, it can't wait. We've been investigating a pattern of fraud in the school district for 6 months. Mrs. Hartford's activities are part of a much larger conspiracy." The room went dead silent. "What kind of conspiracy?" Principal Morgan asked, though his expression suggested he already dreaded the answer. "A network of educators across 3 school districts who've been systematically identifying and exploiting talented students from low-income families. They call themselves Talent Scouts and they've been operating for at least 5 years. Sophia felt the world tilting around her. This wasn't just one corrupt teacher, this was an organized system designed to steal from families like hers. "How many children?" Mayor Rodriguez asked. "At least 47 confirmed victims. Possibly more." Detective Santos looked directly at Sophia. "Your case broke it open. When the mayor's office started investigating the auction fraud, we discovered the connection to similar thefts in other districts." Mrs. Hartford laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor or sanity. "You think this is about greed? You think I wanted to hurt these children? Then what was it about?" Sophia asked, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. It was about giving them what their families never could. Structure. Opportunity. A chance to see their talents properly valued instead of wasted in poverty. By stealing from them? By investing in their futures. The money went toward educational programs, scholarships, opportunities. What educational programs? Detective Santos interrupted, consulting her own notes. Because according to our investigation, the money went toward a house in the suburbs, luxury car payments, and a vacation home in Florida. Mrs. Hartford's face crumpled as her final justification evaporated. Sophia stared at the woman who had shaped her life for 2 years, who had made her feel ashamed of her circumstances, who had stolen from her family while pretending to educate her. Mrs. Hartford, Sophia said quietly, my mom is going into surgery next week. The money from her design could have paid for the treatment she needs. Now what's going to happen to her? For the first time since her arrest began, Mrs. Hartford seemed to understand the human cost of her actions. She looked at Sophia, really looked at her, and saw not an underprivileged student to be managed, but a 9-year-old girl whose mother's life hung in the balance. Sophia, I didn't think. No, Sophia said firmly. You didn't think about us at all. You thought about yourself, and you took what wasn't yours, and now my mom might die because the money that could save her is gone. The brutal honesty of it hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. This wasn't abstract fraud or white-collar crime, this was a teacher stealing hope from children who had little else. Detective Santos stepped forward with handcuffs. Evelyn Hartford, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, conspiracy, and exploitation of minors. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Mrs. Hartford looked back at Sophia one final time. I'm sorry, she whispered. But Sophia had already turned away, focusing instead on Mayor Rodriguez, who was speaking quietly into his phone about emergency victim assistance funds and expedited restitution processes. Because sorry wouldn't save her mother's life. Sorry wouldn't give back the 3 years of dignity Mrs. Hartford had stolen from her family. Sorry wouldn't undo the systematic exploitation of dozens of children whose only crime had been trusting the adults who were supposed to protect them. As Mrs. Hartford was led away in handcuffs, Sophia realized that her worst day, the day she'd been humiliated for wearing shoes made with love, had become something much bigger and more terrifying. It had become the day she learned that the systems designed to protect children could be corrupted by the very people entrusted with their care. And now, with her mother's surgery approaching and the stolen money tied up in legal proceedings that could take months to resolve, Sophia faced an impossible choice: watch her family fall apart while waiting for justice, or find another way to save the person she loved most. But where could a 9-year-old girl find $50,000 when the entire adult world had just revealed itself to be untrustworthy? The answer would come from the most unexpected source of all. And it would teach Sophia that sometimes, when institutions fail, ordinary people have the power to create miracles. 3 days after Mrs. Hartford's arrest, Sophia sat in the principal's office across from Mayor Rodriguez, Detective Santos, and a woman introduced as Ms. Patricia Kim from the district attorney's office. The adults spoke in hushed tones about asset recovery timelines and prosecution phases, but Sophia only understood one thing: her mother's surgery was scheduled for Monday, and it was already Thursday. Sophia, Ms. Kim said gently, I need you to understand that getting your mother's money back is going to take time. Mrs. Hartford spent most of what she stole, and recovering funds from multiple bank accounts requires court orders that could take weeks to process. How many weeks? Sophia asked, though she already knew the answer would be too many. At least 6 to 8 weeks for the initial recovery. Full restitution could take months. Sophia's chest tightened with panic. My mom can't wait months. The doctor said if she doesn't have the surgery soon, her kidneys might stop working completely. Mayor Rodriguez leaned forward, his expression pained. Sophia, the city has emergency assistance programs, but they're designed for smaller amounts. Your mother's surgery costs $47,000, Sophia finished. I asked the hospital. $47,000 that we don't have because Mrs. Hartford stole it. Detective Santos closed her folder with obvious frustration. The Hartford case isn't our only problem. We've discovered that the Talent Scout network has connections to people in the banking system, the auction houses, even some city officials. They've been very careful about how they move money. What does that mean? Sophia asked. It means some of the stolen funds may never be recovered, Ms. Kim admitted. The network has been sophisticated about hiding assets offshore, creating shell companies, obscuring the money trail. Sophia felt the world spinning around her. Not only was her mother's money gone, but it might be gone forever. There's something else, Detective Santos said, glancing at Mayor Rodriguez nervously. Sophia, we've discovered that Mrs. Hartford specifically targeted your family. What do you mean, targeted? She's been monitoring your mother's medical situation for over a year. She knew about the kidney disease, knew about the financial stress, knew that your family would be desperate enough to trust any adult who seemed to care about your education. The revelation hit Sophia like ice water. Mrs. Hartford hadn't just stolen from her, she'd studied her family's pain and used it as a weapon. She planned this, Sophia whispered. 4 months. She identified your mother as an unusually talented designer and deliberately cultivated a relationship with you to gain access to her work. Detective Santos's voice was gentle but relentless. Sophia, Mrs. Hartford requested to have you in her class 2 years in a row. That's not normal procedure. Sophia remembered Mrs. Hartford's initial kindness, the way she'd seemed so interested in Sophia's family, so understanding about her mother's medical appointments. It had all been performance, all been manipulation designed to lower their guard. She made me trust her, Sophia said, the betrayal cutting deeper than the theft itself. She made your whole family trust her, Mayor Rodriguez added. According to our investigation, she volunteered to help with your mother's medical paperwork, offered to write letters of support for financial assistance programs. She had access to all our private information, Sophia realized with growing horror. Medical records, financial documents, insurance information, everything she needed to understand exactly how much your family was worth and how vulnerable you were. Sophia stood abruptly, unable to sit still under the weight of these revelations. I need to call my dad. I need to tell him that Mom's surgery money isn't coming back in time. Sophia, wait, Mayor Rodriguez said. There might be another option. Sophia turned to look at him, hope and suspicion warring in her expression. The manufacturer who bought your mother's design wants to meet with her. They're interested in commissioning additional work, possibly offering her a long-term contract. How long-term? Long enough to cover the surgery costs and provide ongoing income for your family. For the first time in 3 days, Sophia felt her chest loosen slightly. Really? The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. The company representatives are flying in specifically to see your mother. Ms. Kim cleared her throat uncomfortably. Mayor Rodriguez, there's something Sophia should know about that meeting. What? The company, Sustainable Designs International, has some concerning connections. Our financial crimes unit has been monitoring them as part of a separate investigation. Sophia's hope began to crumble again. What kind of investigation? They're suspected of exploiting designers from developing countries, offering contracts that sound generous but actually lock artists into agreements that benefit the company far more than the creators. Detective Santos pulled out another file. Sophia, this company has a pattern of targeting vulnerable artists, people facing medical crises, financial emergencies, family problems. They offer quick solutions that turn into long-term exploitation. So they're like Mrs. Hartford. They're potentially worse than Mrs. Hartford. At least she stole outright. These people steal gradually, legally, through contracts that most people don't understand until it's too late. Sophia sank back into her chair, feeling trapped between impossible choices. Wait months for Mrs. Hartford's stolen money to be recovered and watch her mother's condition deteriorate, or sign a contract that might solve their immediate problem while creating years of new exploitation. There's more, Ms. Kim said quietly. The timing of this company's interest isn't coincidental. They've been monitoring the news coverage of your case, waiting for your family to become desperate enough to accept any offer. They're predators, Sophia said flatly. They're business people who've learned to profit from other people's desperation, Mayor Rodriguez corrected, his voice filled with anger. And they're very good at making exploitation look like opportunity. Sophia's phone buzzed with a text from her father. Mija, the hospital called. They need payment confirmation by tomorrow or they'll have to reschedule Mom's surgery. What do I tell them? Sophia stared at the message, feeling the walls closing in around her. Every solution led to a different kind of trap, every hope revealed itself to be another manipulation. Mayor Rodriguez, Sophia said quietly, what would you do if it was your family? I don't know, he admitted. But I know what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't let anyone else take advantage of your family's pain. Then what options do we have? Before anyone could answer, Sophia's phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number. Mija? Isabella's voice was weak but urgent. Are you still at school? I'm at the principal's office, Mom. What's wrong? The people from the design company are here at the hospital. They said they couldn't wait until tomorrow, that they needed to speak with me immediately about an urgent opportunity. Sophia's blood turned cold. Mom, don't sign anything. Please don't sign anything until I get there. They're saying they can pay for my surgery today if I agree to their terms. Sophia, I don't understand all the legal language, but they seem very eager to help. How eager? Sophia asked, though she already knew the answer would be terrifying. They've offered to pay the hospital directly, right now, if I sign a 5-year exclusive contract giving them rights to all my designs. Detective Santos was already grabbing her jacket. Sophia, we need to get to that hospital immediately. Mom, Sophia said urgently, tell them you need time to think about it. Tell them you need to discuss it with your family. I did, Mija. They said the offer expires in 1 hour. They said if I don't sign today, they'll have to move on to other designers. Sophia felt panic rising in her throat. Mom, please don't. Sophia, I'm scared. The doctors say I need this surgery, and these people are offering to save my life. How can I say no? Because saying yes might cost you everything else, Sophia whispered, but she knew her mother couldn't hear the desperation in her voice. As they rushed toward the hospital, Sophia realized that Mrs. Hartford's theft had been only the beginning of her family's nightmare. The real predators were still circling, using her mother's medical crisis as leverage to secure an even more devastating form of exploitation. And Sophia had less than an hour to figure out how to save her mother's life without sacrificing her mother's future. The 9-year-old girl who'd been humiliated for wearing handmade shoes was about to face the most impossible choice any child should have to make: watch her mother die or watch her mother sign away years of her creative life to people who saw her desperation as a business opportunity. But as they raced through traffic toward the hospital, Sophia began to form a plan, one that would require more courage than she'd ever needed before and more trust than she thought she still had to give. Because sometimes, when all the adults fail you, the only person left to save your family is yourself. Even if you're only 9 years old and wearing shoes made from love instead of money. Sophia burst through the hospital's automatic doors alongside Detective Santos and Mayor Rodriguez, her heart pounding as they rushed toward the elevator that would take them to her mother's floor. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in harsh relief, making the urgency feel even more desperate. Room 314, Sophia called out as the elevator climbed, but Mayor Rodriguez was staring at his phone with an expression that made her stomach clench with dread. Mayor Rodriguez? Detective Santos noticed his distraction. What is it? I just received a message from my office. There's been a complication with the Sustainable Designs International situation. Sophia felt ice forming in her veins. What kind of complication? The company isn't from out of town like we thought. They're local. And they've been major donors to city programs for the past 3 years. Detective Santos grabbed the phone from Mayor Rodriguez's hands, scanning the message quickly. Her face went pale. Mayor, this says they've donated over $200,000 to various city initiatives, including your re-election campaign. The elevator seemed to slow to a crawl as the implications settled over them. You knew them, Sophia whispered, staring at Mayor Rodriguez with dawning horror. You knew this company before today. Sophia, I had no idea they were involved in exploitation schemes. They presented themselves as a legitimate sustainable fashion company interested in supporting local artists. But you took their money, Detective Santos said, her voice sharp with accusation. Your campaign took their money. That doesn't mean I knew about their business practices. Sophia backed against the elevator wall, feeling betrayal crash over her like a wave. You've been lying to me. I haven't been lying. I've been trying to help your family while managing a complex political situation. What political situation? Sophia's voice was small but fierce. Mayor Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, his expression tortured. Sophia, Sustainable Designs International has contracts with the city to manufacture uniforms for city workers, promotional materials for tourism, various civic projects. If they're exposed as exploitative, it could cost the city millions in contract penalties and legal fees. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, but Sophia didn't move. You're protecting them, she said flatly. I'm trying to protect everyone. Your family, the city, the other families who depend on city services that could be cut if we lose those contracts. By letting them steal from my mom. By trying to find a solution that doesn't destroy innocent people in the process. Detective Santos stepped between them, her expression grim. Mayor Rodriguez, are you saying you've known about the company's questionable practices and haven't acted on it? I'm saying I've had concerns that I've been investigating through proper channels. What proper channels? Sophia demanded. You're the mayor. You could have stopped them. Sophia, municipal government is more complicated than. It's not complicated. Sophia's voice echoed down the hospital corridor. They hurt people to make money, and you let them do it because stopping them would be inconvenient for you. Before Mayor Rodriguez could respond, Sophia ran down the hallway toward her mother's room, leaving the adults to follow behind her. But as she approached room 314, she could hear voices through the partially open door, her mother's weak but determined tone, and 2 voices she didn't recognize speaking in the smooth, persuasive cadences of professional manipulators. Mrs. Reyes, this really is a time-sensitive offer, a man's voice was saying. The manufacturing timeline requires us to finalize agreements today. I understand your hesitation, a woman's voice added, but consider what this could mean for your family. Your daughter's future, your husband's financial stress, your own medical needs, all resolved with one signature. Sophia pressed herself against the wall outside the door, listening as her mother's life was reduced to a business transaction. The contract seems very long, Isabella said weakly. 5 years is a significant commitment. It's a significant opportunity, the man replied. Mrs. Reyes, how many fashion companies are willing to pay a $47,000 advance to an unknown designer? This is recognition of your extraordinary talent. But all my designs for 5 years. Every pattern, every innovation. Think of it as an investment in your professional development. Our company will provide resources, marketing, distribution, everything you need to become successful in the fashion industry. Sophia peeked around the doorframe and saw her mother lying in the hospital bed, looking frail and overwhelmed, while two well-dressed people sat beside her with paperwork spread across the bedside table. The contract looked thick and intimidating, covered in small print that her mother would never be able to review properly in her current condition. "Mom," Sophia said quietly, stepping into the room. Isabella's face lit up with relief. "Sophia. Thank God you're here." The two company representatives turned toward Sophia with practiced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "You must be Sophia," the woman said warmly. "I'm Ms. Jennifer Walsh from Sustainable Designs International, and this is my colleague, Mr. David Chen. We've heard so much about you." Sophia studied them carefully, noting the expensive clothes, the perfectly styled hair, the way they'd positioned themselves between her mother and the door. "We were just explaining to your mother what an amazing opportunity this represents for your family," Mr. Chen said. "With the advance payment, her surgery can proceed immediately, and the ongoing royalties will provide financial security for years to come." "How much are the ongoing royalties?" Sophia asked. Ms. Walsh and Mr. Chen exchanged a quick glance. "That depends on sales performance, market conditions, various factors that are detailed in the contract." "Can I see the contract?" "Sophia, this is really an agreement between adults," Ms. Walsh said gently. "Your mother is perfectly capable of making this decision on her own." But Isabella gestured for Sophia to come closer. "Mija, they're offering to pay for my surgery today. Right now. The hospital has agreed to proceed immediately if we sign this agreement." Sophia looked at the paperwork, seeing page after page of dense legal language that even she could tell was designed to be confusing. "Mom, what does this part mean?" Sophia pointed to a clause near the end of the contract. Isabella squinted at the text. I'm not sure. The medication makes it hard to focus. It's standard language about intellectual property rights," Mr. Chen said dismissively. "Nothing to worry about." But Sophia could read well enough to understand that the clause gave Sustainable Designs International ownership of not just her mother's designs, but any derivative works, improvements, or innovations, based on her mother's techniques. "Forever. This says you own everything my mom creates for the rest of her life," Sophia said quietly. "Sophia, you're misunderstanding complex legal terminology," Ms. Walsh said, but her tone had gotten sharper. "I'm 9, not stupid," Sophia replied. "This contract says that even after 5 years, if my mom uses any technique or idea she developed while working for you, you still own it." Isabella struggled to sit up straighter in the hospital bed. "Is that true?" "Mrs. Reyes, you're listening to a child who doesn't understand business contracts," Mr. Chen said impatiently. "We have a surgery to schedule and a very limited window to make this happen." But Sophia was reading more of the contract, her horror growing with each clause. "Mom, this also says that if you can't meet their production deadlines because you're sick, you have to pay back the advance plus interest." "That's a standard performance clause," Ms. Walsh said quickly. "It's a trap," Sophia said flatly. "They're betting that you'll get sick again and won't be able to work, and then they'll own all your designs and you'll owe them money." Isabella looked at the contract with new understanding, the medication-induced fog lifting as maternal protectiveness sharpened her focus. "I think I need more time to review this," she said carefully. "Mrs. Reyes," Mr. Chen's voice carried a subtle threat, "the surgical team is prepared to operate this afternoon. If we don't finalize this agreement now, they'll have to reschedule, and given your condition." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear: sign now or risk dying while waiting for another opportunity. How long would she have to wait? Sophia asked. "Weeks. Possibly months, depending on her insurance approval process and surgical availability." Sophia felt the trap closing around them. These people had timed their offer perfectly, creating artificial urgency around her mother's medical crisis to pressure her into signing away her creative freedom. At that moment, Mayor Rodriguez and Detective Santos appeared in the doorway. "Excuse me," Detective Santos said, showing her badge. "I need to speak with Ms. Walsh and Mr. Chen privately." "Detective, we're in the middle of a time-sensitive business negotiation," Ms. Walsh said coolly. "I'm sure you are. That's exactly what I need to discuss with you." As the three adults moved into the hallway, Sophia heard fragments of their conversation, words like investigation, predatory practices, and federal charges. But through the window, Sophia could see more men in suits approaching the hospital entrance, and she realized with growing horror that Sustainable Designs International had brought backup. This wasn't just aggressive business practice, this was coordinated intimidation designed to force her mother into compliance. "Mom," Sophia whispered urgently, "we need to leave. Right now." "Mija, I can't leave. I need the surgery." "Not like this. There has to be another way." But as Sophia looked at her mother, pale, weak, desperate, and running out of time, she realized that sometimes there is no other way. Sometimes the choice isn't between good and bad, but between bad and worse. And sometimes, when all the adults in your life reveal themselves to be either corrupt, compromised, or powerless, a 9-year-old girl has to find the courage to save her family herself. Even when she has no idea how. "Sophia," Isabella said softly, "what if this is our only chance?" Sophia looked at her mother, at the contract that would steal her creative soul, at the approaching men who wanted to profit from their desperation, and at Mayor Rodriguez in the hallway, whose political concerns had made him an unreliable ally. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sophia was truly alone. And her mother's life depended on the choice she made in the next few minutes. Sophia heard her mother's breathing become more labored as the men in suits filled the hospital corridor outside room 314. Through the window, she could see Detective Santos arguing with Ms. Walsh and Mr. Chen while Mayor Rodriguez stood to the side, clearly torn between his political obligations and his moral duty. "Mrs. Reyes," came a new voice from the doorway, an older man in an expensive coat who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. "I'm Robert Sterling, CEO of Sustainable Designs International. I understand there's been some confusion about our generous offer." Sophia positioned herself between the CEO and her mother's bed, her 9-year-old frame somehow radiating protective fury. "There's no confusion," Sophia said firmly. "Your contract is designed to steal everything my mom creates for the rest of her life." Mr. Sterling smiled with the patronizing warmth of someone who perfected the art of manipulation. "Sophia, isn't it? I've heard you're quite the bright young lady. But business contracts are complex documents that require adult understanding. I understand that you're trying to trick my mom into signing away her future because she's scared and sick." "I'm trying to save your mother's life," Mr. Sterling corrected, his voice carrying just enough sincerity to sound believable. "The hospital has informed me that without immediate payment, they'll be forced to discharge her today." Sophia felt her chest tighten with panic. "That's not true." "I'm afraid it is," Isabella said weakly from the bed. "Dr. Martinez just called. The insurance company denied coverage for the experimental procedure. Without private payment, they can't justify keeping me here." Sophia stared at her mother, the final piece of their trap falling into place. Not only did they need money for surgery, but her mother would be sent home to die without immediate intervention. "How convenient," Sophia said quietly, looking at Mr. Sterling with new understanding. "You knew about the insurance denial before you came here." Mr. Sterling's smile didn't waver. "Sophia, Sustainable Designs International has relationships throughout the medical industry. We're often able to facilitate solutions that benefit everyone involved." "You caused the insurance denial," Sophia whispered, the full scope of their manipulation becoming clear. We simply provided accurate information about experimental procedures and their success rates, Ms. Walsh said from the doorway, having returned from her conversation with Detective Santos. Insurance companies appreciate transparency. Sophia felt her world crumbling around her. Not only were these people trying to exploit her mother, they'd actively sabotaged her medical care to create the desperation necessary to force her compliance. Sophia, Detective Santos appeared beside Ms. Walsh, her expression grim. "I need to speak with you privately." "No more private conversations," Sophia said, exhaustion and betrayal making her voice hollow. "Every time adults have private conversations about my family, we end up worse off." Detective Santos glanced at Mr. Sterling, then back at Sophia. "The investigation into Sustainable Designs International has been suspended." The words hit the room like a physical blow. "What do you mean, suspended?" Sophia asked. "Federal authorities have determined that the company's business practices, while aggressive, don't meet the threshold for criminal prosecution." Sophia felt her knees go weak. "They're not going to be arrested?" Additionally, Mr. Sterling said with obvious satisfaction, Detective Santos has been informed that interfering with legitimate business negotiations could be considered harassment. Sophia looked at Detective Santos, seeing defeat and frustration in her expression. "You can't help us." "My hands are tied, Sophia." "I'm sorry. Where's Mayor Rodriguez?" Detective Santos hesitated. "He's been called back to City Hall for an emergency meeting with the City Council." Sophia didn't need to ask what the emergency meeting was about. Political damage control, protecting campaign donors, managing the fallout from a scandal that could hurt his re-election chances. "So he abandoned us too." "Sophia, he's trying to work within the system. The system that's designed to protect people like them," Sophia gestured at Mr. Sterling and his associates, "and hurt people like us." Isabella struggled to sit up in her hospital bed, her movement drawing everyone's attention. "Mija, maybe we should consider their offer. If it's the only way to pay for the surgery." "Mom, no. You don't understand what you'd be giving up." "I understand that I'm dying," Isabella said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "And I understand that this might be the only chance I have to live long enough to see you grow up." Sophia felt tears streaming down her face as the impossible choice crystallized in front of her. Watch her mother die to preserve her creative freedom, or watch her mother sign away her artistic soul to stay alive. "Mrs. Reyes," Mr. Sterling said gently, "the surgical team is standing by. All we need is your signature, and we can proceed immediately." "And if she dies during surgery?" Sophia asked desperately. "What happens to the contract then?" "The estate would be responsible for fulfilling the terms," Ms. Walsh said matter-of-factly. Sophia stared at her in horror. "You mean even if my mom dies, you still own everything she ever created?" "It's standard industry practice to protect intellectual property investments." Sophia realized with crystal clarity that these people saw her mother not as a human being, but as a resource to be extracted and exploited. Whether Isabella lived or died, they would profit from her creativity. "Sophia," Isabella said softly, "come here, Mija." Sophia approached her mother's bedside, and Isabella took her hands with trembling fingers. "I need you to understand something," Isabella whispered. "My designs, my creativity, my artistic vision, none of that matters if I'm not alive to share it with you. But Mom, if you sign this contract. If I sign this contract, I get to teach you how to sew. I get to help you with your homework. I get to see you graduate from high school and college. I get to dance at your wedding." Isabella's voice was getting stronger with each word. "My art is important, but you are everything." Sophia felt her world splitting apart. Her mother was choosing life over art, survival over freedom, and Sophia couldn't bring herself to argue with that choice. Mrs. Reyes, Mr. Sterling said, sensing victory, shall we proceed with the paperwork? But before Isabella could answer, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Voices were raised, footsteps were running, and someone was shouting about security. Through the window, Sophia saw something that made her heart race with hope and terror. Her father, Eduardo, was striding down the corridor with a group of people Sophia didn't recognize, working-class men and women who looked like they'd come straight from job sites and factories. "What's happening?" Ms. Walsh asked nervously. Eduardo burst into the room, his face flushed with exertion and anger. "Isabella, don't sign anything." "Eduardo? How did you?" "Sophia called me. She told me what these people were trying to do." Eduardo looked at Mr. Sterling with the kind of controlled fury that came from years of being exploited by men in expensive suits. "And I brought some friends who want to have a conversation about business ethics." Mr. Sterling's composure faltered slightly. "Mr. Reyes, this is a private business meeting." "Nothing about this is private," Eduardo interrupted. "When you target families in medical crisis, when you manipulate insurance companies, when you prey on children and sick people, that becomes community business." Through the window, Sophia could see more people arriving, neighbors, co-workers, parents from her school. Word had spread somehow, and people were coming to bear witness to what was happening. "Mr. Reyes," Ms. Walsh said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, "you're interfering with a legitimate business transaction." "I'm protecting my family from predators," Eduardo replied simply. But Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in low, urgent tones. Within minutes, hospital security appeared, followed by police officers who seemed to know exactly where to go. "I'm sorry," the lead security officer said to Eduardo, "but you're going to need to clear this area. Hospital policy prohibits large gatherings in patient rooms." "And what about them?" Eduardo gestured at the Sustainable Designs International team. "Are they violating hospital policy?" "They have scheduled appointments and proper documentation." Sophia watched her father's hope crumble as he realized that even here, even surrounded by community support, the system was designed to protect the wealthy and powerful at the expense of families like theirs. "Eduardo," Isabella said weakly, "it's okay. Let them go. I need to sign this contract." "Isabella, no." "Eduardo, look at me. Really look at me." Isabella's voice was failing, her strength fading visibly. "I'm dying. This contract might be terrible, but it's the only chance I have to live long enough to see our children grow up." Sophia watched her parents look at each other across the hospital room, Eduardo standing in the doorway surrounded by friends who couldn't help, Isabella lying in the bed facing an impossible choice, and both of them understanding that love sometimes meant accepting defeat. "I'll sign it," Isabella whispered. Mr. Sterling stepped forward with obvious relief, but Sophia moved to block his path. "Wait," she said quietly. Everyone in the room turned to look at her, this 9-year-old girl who'd been fighting adults all day, who'd discovered corruption and exploitation and systematic cruelty, who'd watched every trusted authority figure reveal themselves to be either powerless or compromised. "Sophia, Mija," Isabella said gently, "it's time to let the adults handle this." "No," Sophia said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone. "All day, adults have been handling my family's problems, and every time they handle things, we end up worse off." She looked at Mr. Sterling, at his expensive suit and predatory smile, at the contract that would steal her mother's creative soul. "I want to make a different deal," Sophia said. Mr. Sterling laughed. "Sophia, children can't enter into legally binding contracts. But they can make public statements. They can tell stories. They can make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of company Sustainable Designs International really is." Sophia pulled out her phone, the old device her parents had given her for emergencies, and opened the video recording app. "I'm 9 years old," she said to the camera, "and I'm about to watch a company force my sick mother to sign away her creative freedom because they've made sure she has no other choice." Mr. Sterling's expression shifted from condescension to alarm. "Sophia, stop recording. My name is Sophia Reyes, and I want everyone to know that Sustainable Designs International caused my mother's insurance to be denied so they could pressure her into signing an exploitative contract." "Turn off that camera immediately," Ms. Walsh demanded. But Sophia kept recording, and through the window, she could see other people pulling out their phones, creating a network of witnesses that couldn't be silenced or suppressed. "They're betting that we're too poor and too scared to fight back," Sophia continued. "They're betting that nobody will care about what happens to families like mine." "Security!" Mr. Sterling called out. But the security officers hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the optics of restraining a 9-year-old girl defending her dying mother. "Here's what I want everyone to know," Sophia said to her phone camera, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Sometimes there are no good choices. Sometimes you have to choose between terrible things. But you don't have to choose in silence." She looked directly at Mr. Sterling. "If my mom signs your contract, the whole world is going to know exactly how you got that signature. They're going to know that you targeted a sick woman and her 9-year-old daughter. They're going to know that you manipulated insurance companies and exploited medical crises for profit." Sophia's voice grew stronger. "And they're going to know that even when you win, even when you get what you want, you had to steal it from people who were already suffering." The room fell completely silent except for the sound of Isabella's labored breathing and the mechanical hum of medical equipment. Mr. Sterling stared at Sophia for a long moment, clearly calculating whether the profit from one contract was worth the public relations nightmare of being exposed as someone who exploited dying mothers and their children. "Mrs. Reyes," he said finally, "perhaps we should postpone this discussion until you've had more time to consider our generous offer." But Sophia wasn't finished. "Mr. Sterling, there's one more thing everyone should know about your generous offer." "What's that?" Sophia held up the contract, pointing to a clause she'd spotted while everyone was arguing. "This contract has a death clause. If my mom dies, her estate has to keep making designs for you for 5 years. You're literally betting that she'll die so you can profit from her creativity without having to pay her for it." The accusation hung in the air like a bomb, and Sophia watched Mr. Sterling's face cycle through several emotions before settling on cold fury. "That's enough," he said quietly. "Turn off the camera, or there will be consequences." "What consequences?" Sophia asked. "Are you going to threaten a 9-year-old on video? Are you going to add that to your company's public image?" For the first time since this nightmare began, Sophia saw fear in the eyes of someone who'd been trying to exploit her family. But she also saw something else, a hardness that suggested Mr. Sterling was far from finished with them. And as hospital security moved to clear the room and Eduardo was forced to step back into the hallway, Sophia realized that her moment of defiance might have just made everything infinitely worse for her family. Because some people, when backed into a corner, don't retreat. They attack. The hospital room emptied quickly after Sophia's video recording, leaving only her family and the lingering tension of a battle that was far from over. Mr. Sterling and his team had retreated, but their departure felt more like a tactical withdrawal than a defeat. Isabella lay in the bed, her breathing shallow, while Eduardo paced by the window. "Mija," Eduardo said quietly, "that was very brave, but I'm worried about what comes next." Sophia was uploading her video to every social media platform she could think of, her fingers flying across her phone screen with desperate efficiency. "Dad, we can't let them get away with this. If we don't fight back, they'll just find another family to hurt. And if we do fight back, they might destroy us completely," Eduardo replied, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "Sophia, men like Sterling don't lose gracefully." Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Detective Santos. "Sophia, you need to listen to me very carefully," Detective Santos said without preamble. "Your video is going viral, but Sterling's people are already working to discredit you. They're claiming you're being coached by adults with ulterior motives." "What kind of ulterior motives?" "They're saying your father has gambling debts, that your family is desperate for money, that you're willing to make false accusations to generate sympathy donations." Sophia felt ice forming in her veins. "That's not true." "I know it's not true, but they have documentation. Bank records, loan applications, betting receipts. They've manufactured an entire false narrative about your family's financial situation." Sophia looked at her father, who had gone pale. "Dad?" "Sophia, Eduardo's voice broke. "There are things about our situation that I haven't told you and your mother." Isabella struggled to sit up in the hospital bed. "Eduardo, what is she talking about?" Eduardo moved to his wife's bedside, his hands shaking. "Bella, when your medical bills started getting overwhelming, when the insurance company kept denying claims, I got desperate." "How desperate?" Isabella whispered. "I took out loans. High-interest loans from people who weren't exactly banks." Sophia felt the room spinning around her. "Dad, what kind of people?" "The kind who want their money back very quickly, and who don't accept excuses when you can't pay." Detective Santos's voice came through the phone speaker. "Sophia, your father owes approximately $30,000 to a loan shark operation that has connections to organized crime. Sterling's people found out about this debt and they're using it to destroy your credibility." Sophia stared at her father, understanding dawning like a terrible sunrise. "The gambling receipts they have, are they real?" Eduardo's silence was answer enough. "Dad? I thought I could win enough to cover your mother's medical expenses," Eduardo said desperately. "I thought if I could just get lucky once, just win enough to pay for her surgery." "You've been gambling away the money we needed for Mom's treatment." "I've been trying to multiply the little money we had into enough money to save her life." Isabella was crying now, the betrayal cutting through her physical pain. "Eduardo, how much did you lose?" "Everything," Eduardo whispered. "Every penny we saved, every dollar from the fundraisers, every gift from family, I lost it all trying to win enough to save you." Sophia felt her world crumbling for the second time in one day. First Mrs. Hartford's theft, now her father's gambling addiction. Every source of hope had been tainted by the desperation that came with watching someone you love slowly die. "There's more," Detective Santos said through the phone. "Sterling's people are claiming that your father approached them about selling your mother's designs. They're saying the entire confrontation today was staged to drive up the price." "That's not true," Sophia said desperately. "Sophia," Eduardo said quietly, "there's something else you need to know." Sophia looked at her father, dreading whatever revelation was coming next. "I did contact Sustainable Designs International. 3 weeks ago, when the debt collectors started threatening us, I reached out to them about your mother's work." Isabella gasped. "Eduardo, you didn't." "I didn't sign anything. I just asked if they might be interested in her designs. I was trying to find any way to raise money for your surgery." Sophia felt betrayal cutting deeper than any physical pain. "Dad, how could you?" "Because I'm watching my wife die and I'm powerless to stop it. Because every day she gets weaker and every day we get further behind on bills and every day I feel like more of a failure as a husband and father." Eduardo's voice broke completely. "Sophia, I've been drowning. I've been making terrible decisions and lying to everyone I love because I didn't know what else to do." "So Sterling already knew about Mom's designs before Mrs. Hartford stole them?" "Yes. But Sophia, I swear to you, I never agreed to anything. When I found out what kind of company they really were, I stopped all contact. But they didn't stop, Isabella said weakly. They kept monitoring our situation, waiting for us to become desperate enough to accept their terms. Sophia's phone buzzed with another call, this time from Mayor Rodriguez. Sophia, I need you to come to City Hall immediately, the mayor said without preamble. Sterling has filed formal complaints against you and your family. He's claiming harassment, defamation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. What does that mean? It means he's trying to have you and your parents arrested. Sophia felt panic rising in her throat. Can he do that? With the documentation he has about your father's debts and his initial contact with the company, yes. He's building a case that your entire family orchestrated this situation to extort money from his company. But that's insane. We're the victims here. Sophia, I believe you. But Sterling has lawyers, money, and political connections. He's very good at making victims look like criminals. Sophia looked around the hospital room, at her mother dying in the bed, at her father destroyed by his own desperate choices, at the community support that had evaporated the moment things got complicated. Mayor Rodriguez, what happens if we're arrested? Your parents would be held pending trial. You'd be placed in emergency foster care. Your mother would be discharged from the hospital to await arraignment. Sophia understood the final trap. Sterling didn't need to force them to sign his contract anymore. He just needed to destroy them so thoroughly that no one would believe their story when they tried to warn other families. There's one option, Mayor Rodriguez said quietly. What? Sterling has offered to drop all charges if your family issues a public apology, admits that your accusations were false, and agrees to never speak publicly about Sustainable Designs International again. Sophia felt the impossible choice crystallizing in front of her. Admit to lying about everything, Mrs. Hartford's theft, Sterling's exploitation, the systematic targeting of vulnerable families, and watch other children suffer the same fate, or fight back and lose everything, including her mother's life. Sophia, Isabella called weakly from the bed. Come here, Mija. Sophia approached her mother's bedside, tears streaming down her face. I want you to take the deal, Isabella whispered. Mom, no. Sophia, I'm dying. We all know it. The surgery might buy me a few more months, but the cancer has spread. The dialysis is just keeping me alive long enough to say goodbye. Sophia felt her world shatter completely. What cancer? Isabella reached up to touch Sophia's face with trembling fingers. The doctors found it 3 weeks ago. Even if we could afford the surgery, even if everything went perfectly, I have maybe 6 months. You didn't tell me. Because I wanted you to keep fighting. I wanted you to keep believing that there was hope. Isabella's voice was growing weaker. But now I need you to be practical. I need you to protect yourself and your father. By lying. By letting Sterling win. By staying alive and staying together as a family for whatever time we have left. Sophia looked at her mother, the woman who had sewn love into cardboard shoes, who had created beauty from scraps, who had fought for her family even while her own body was failing. Mom, if I take this deal, if I admit we were lying, Sterling will hurt other families. Other kids will go through what we went through. And if you don't take the deal, we'll all be destroyed and Sterling will hurt families anyway. Sophia understood the terrible mathematics of corruption. Fight back and lose everything while the predators continue operating, or surrender and preserve what little they had left while enabling future victimization. Sophia, Eduardo said quietly, your mother is right. We have to think about what's realistic. What's realistic is that people like Sterling keep winning because families like ours don't have the power to fight back, Sophia replied. She looked at her phone, seeing that her video had been shared thousands of times, seeing comments from people expressing outrage and support. But she also saw the counternarrative emerging, carefully crafted posts questioning her family's motives, suggesting they were con artists, casting doubt on everything she'd said. "I have to choose," Sophia said quietly, "between saving my family and saving other families." "You have to choose," Isabella corrected gently, "between accepting what we can't change and fighting battles we can't win." Sophia stood at her mother's bedside, 9 years old and facing a decision that would shape not just her future, but the futures of countless other children whose creativity would be either protected or exploited based on what she decided in the next few minutes. Fight Sterling and watch her family be destroyed while he continued preying on vulnerable people, or surrender to him and preserve her family's safety while enabling his continued exploitation of others. Either choice meant someone innocent would suffer. Either choice meant the system designed to protect children would continue to fail them. Either choice meant that speaking truth to power came with a cost too high for any child to pay. But as Sophia looked at her mother's face, weak but proud, defeated but unbroken, she realized there might be a third option. One that would require more courage than she'd ever needed before. One that would risk everything she had left to give other families something she'd never had, a real choice. "Mom," Sophia said quietly, "what if there was a way to save other kids without destroying us?" "What do you mean?" Sophia looked at her phone, at the video that was still spreading across social media, at the power she'd accidentally discovered in telling her story publicly. "What if I don't take Sterling's deal, and I don't try to fight him in court? Then what would you do?" Sophia smiled for the first time all day, not with happiness, but with the terrible certainty of someone who'd finally understood what needed to be done. "I'd do what Mrs. Hartford and Sterling are both afraid of," Sophia said. "Which is?" "I'd tell the truth. All of it. Everything. And I'd make sure the whole world was watching when I did. Because sometimes, when you're 9 years old and every adult has failed you, the only weapon you have left is the one they can't take away from you. Your voice." And Sophia Reyes was about to use hers to change everything. Sophia stood in the center of the hospital room, her phone still recording, but this time she wasn't speaking to social media, she was broadcasting live to a local news station that had been following her story since the video went viral. "My name is Sophia Reyes," she said to the camera, her voice steady despite everything crumbling around her. "I'm 9 years old, and I want to tell you about what happens when adults think children don't matter." Through the phone, she could see the live viewer count climbing, 15,000, 25,000, 50,000 people watching a fourth grader take on a system designed to silence her. "Yesterday, my teacher Mrs. Hartford made fun of my shoes. She said they were inappropriate, embarrassing, not good enough for her classroom." Sophia held up one of her feet, showing the handmade shoe to the camera. "But these shoes were made by my mom, who's dying in this hospital bed behind me, with her own hands and all her love." Isabella smiled weakly from the bed, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter find the courage she'd given her. "What Mrs. Hartford didn't tell anyone was that she'd been stealing my mom's designs for 3 years. She took my mom's artwork, sold it for $50,000, and kept all the money while my family struggled to pay for medical treatment." The viewer count hit 100,000. But Mrs. Hartford isn't the real problem. The real problem is a company called Sustainable Designs International, run by a man named Robert Sterling. Sophia looked directly into the camera. "Mr. Sterling has spent today trying to force my dying mother to sign a contract that would steal everything she ever creates. And when we said no, he tried to have my family arrested." Sophia held up a thick folder that Eduardo had brought from home, documents he'd been too ashamed to show anyone. "But here's what Mr. Sterling doesn't want you to know. My dad isn't the only person who contacted him about family members' artwork. We found these papers in our house, letters, emails, phone records showing that Sterling's company has been recruiting families in medical crisis for over 5 years." The revelation hit the live stream like a bomb. Sophia began reading names from the documents. The Martinez family, their son had leukemia, and Sterling bought his digital art for almost nothing when they needed money for chemotherapy. The Johnson family, their daughter's poetry was turned into a best-selling children's book series, and they received a one-time payment of $2,000 while Sterling's company made millions. Eduardo stepped closer to the camera. "Sophia, how did you know to look for those papers?" "Because this afternoon, when Detective Santos said Sterling had documentation about our family, I realized he knew too much about us. Nobody gets that kind of information unless they've been planning this for a long time." Sophia pulled out her laptop, an old device the school had loaned her for remote learning during her mother's hospitalizations. "So I did something Mrs. Hartford taught us in computer class. I researched." Sophia's fingers flew across the keyboard. "And I found Sterling's real business plan." On the laptop screen, she displayed a document that made everyone in the room gasp. "This is from Sterling's company website, a page that's been hidden from public view but accessible through search engines. It's called, Crisis Opportunity Portfolio, Monetizing Creative Assets from Financially Vulnerable Demographics." The viewer count was approaching 200,000 as Sophia read directly from Sterling's internal document. Target families with medical emergencies, educational debt, or housing instability. Approach during maximum stress periods when decision-making is compromised. Offer immediate financial relief in exchange for comprehensive intellectual property rights. Legal language should prioritize enforceability over comprehension. Isabella struggled to sit up in her hospital bed. "Mija, what are you saying?" "I'm saying Sterling's entire business model is based on finding families like ours when we're desperate and stealing from us legally." Sophia's voice was getting stronger with each word. "He doesn't just take advantage of medical crises, he helps create them." Sophia clicked to another document on her laptop. "Here's an email chain between Sterling and insurance company executives. They share information about families whose claims are likely to be denied, and Sterling's company reaches out to those families within 48 hours of the denial." The live stream exploded with comments as viewers realized the scope of the conspiracy. "But here's the part that's going to make you really angry," Sophia continued. "Sterling doesn't just target random families. He specifically targets communities of color, immigrants, and single-parent households because he knows we're less likely to have resources to fight back." Sophia held up a statistical analysis from Sterling's files. 68% of his acquisitions come from Hispanic families. 22% from African American families. 7% from recent immigrants. Only 3% from white families, and those were specifically chosen because they had no family support networks. The viewer count hit 300,000. "Mr. Sterling," Sophia said, looking directly into the camera, "I know you're watching this. I know your lawyers are probably trying to figure out how to stop me from talking. But here's what I want you to know." Sophia stood up straighter, and for a moment she looked older than her 9 years, not with weariness, but with the kind of moral authority that comes from facing down evil and refusing to blink. "You picked the wrong family to steal from." At that moment, the hospital room door opened, and Detective Santos entered with 2 federal agents and a woman Sophia didn't recognize. "Sophia," Detective Santos said, "I need you to stop the live stream." "Why?" "Because you just provided evidence of a federal conspiracy that we've been investigating for 18 months. And continuing to broadcast could compromise witness safety." Sophia looked at the agents, then at the camera. "Did you hear that, everyone? The FBI has been investigating Sterling for a year and a half." "Sophia," one of the agents started. "Which means they knew he was hurting families like mine, and they let it continue while they built their case." Sophia's voice carried a hurt that cut deeper than anger. "How many kids got stolen from while you were investigating?" The unknown woman stepped forward. "Sophia, my name is Agent Maria Gonzalez. You're right, we've been building a case against Sterling's network for over a year. But we needed evidence of the systematic nature of the fraud, and victims willing to testify. You had victims. Mrs. Hartford had been stealing from kids for 3 years. Mrs. Hartford was small-scale. Sterling's operation spans 12 states and involves coordination with insurance companies, medical facilities, and educational institutions. We needed to map the entire network before making arrests. Sophia stared at Agent Gonzalez. So you used families like mine as bait. We used the evidence families like yours provided to build cases that will protect hundreds of other families, while letting us get destroyed in the process. Agent Gonzalez was quiet for a moment. Yes. And I'm sorry for that. Sophia looked at the camera, which was still broadcasting to over 400,000 viewers. Everyone watching this, I want you to understand something. The adults who are supposed to protect children don't always do their jobs. Sometimes they get distracted by politics, or bureaucracy, or building perfect legal cases while real kids suffer. Sophia's voice was steady but filled with pain. But that doesn't mean we have to stay silent. It doesn't mean we have to accept being hurt by people who think children don't matter. The woman Sophia didn't recognize stepped forward. Sophia, there's something you should know. I'm Dr. Jennifer Martinez, head of pediatric surgery at Children's Hospital. We've been following your story, and we'd like to offer your mother a full scholarship for her surgical treatment. Sophia felt her breath catch. What? Children's Hospital has a program for families facing exactly your situation. Your mother's surgery can be performed at no cost, with full postoperative care included. Isabella was crying now, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal. Is this real? It's real, Dr. Martinez said gently. We can begin preoperative preparations tomorrow morning. Sophia felt relief flooding through her, but she wasn't finished with her broadcast. Everyone watching, this is wonderful news for my family. But it doesn't solve the bigger problem. Sophia looked directly into the camera. Sterling's company is still operating. They're still targeting desperate families. And there are probably dozens of other companies doing the same thing. Agent Gonzalez stepped into the camera frame. Sophia's right. Which is why the FBI is announcing Operation Clean Slate, a nationwide investigation into predatory intellectual property practices targeting vulnerable communities. How many companies? Sophia asked. At least 17 that we know of. Possibly more. Sophia turned back to the camera. You hear that? 17 companies that make money by stealing from families when we're at our weakest. The live stream comments were flowing too fast to read, but Sophia could see the pattern: outrage, support, demands for justice, and people sharing their own stories of being exploited during medical crises. Here's what I want everyone watching to do, Sophia said. If someone approaches your family during a medical emergency or financial crisis and offers to help monetize your creative work, ask questions. Lots of questions. Get second opinions. And remember, legitimate companies don't pressure you to sign contracts immediately. Sophia looked at her mother, then at her father, then at the federal agents who had been building their case while families suffered. Most importantly, remember that your creativity, your artwork, your innovations belong to you. No matter how desperate you are, no matter how scared you are, no matter how many adults tell you otherwise, your creativity has value, and you deserve to benefit from that value. Sophia faced the camera one final time. My name is Sophia Reyes. I'm 9 years old, and I want to live in a world where children's voices matter, where families can trust the people who say they want to help, and where creativity is protected instead of exploited. She smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in days. I think we just took the first step toward building that world. As Sophia ended the live stream, the hospital room erupted in activity. Agent Gonzalez was coordinating with Detective Santos about arrests, Dr. Martinez was discussing surgical schedules with Isabella, and Eduardo was holding his wife's hand while crying with relief. But Sofia was looking out the window at the crowd that had gathered outside the hospital, hundreds of people holding signs supporting her family, demanding justice for artistic theft, calling for protection of vulnerable communities. Her voice, the voice of a 9-year-old girl wearing handmade shoes and fighting for her mother's life, had created something Sterling and his network couldn't control or monetize. It had created a movement. And movements, Sofia was learning, were much harder to silence than individual families. "Sofia," Agent Gonzalez said, "there's one more thing. Sterling just called his lawyers and offered to surrender. Full cooperation with our investigation in exchange for consideration during sentencing." Sofia looked at the agent, then at her family, then at the crowd outside the window. "Agent Gonzalez," Sofia said quietly, "what happens to all the families Sterling already stole from?" "Full restitution, plus damages. Every family will be compensated for their losses." "And Mrs. Hartford?" "She's agreed to testify against the larger network. Her cooperation will help us prosecute the people who recruited her into the conspiracy." Sofia nodded, feeling something she'd never experienced before, the satisfaction of justice served and accountability demanded. But more than that, she felt the power of truth spoken publicly, courageously, by someone who refused to be silenced by people who thought children didn't matter. Her mother would live. Her family would heal. And other families would be protected from the predators who saw desperation as an opportunity for profit. Sofia Reyes had learned that sometimes, when you're 9 years old and every adult has failed you, you can still change the world. You just have to be brave enough to tell the truth loudly enough for everyone to hear. 6 months later, Sofia stood in front of the newly renovated community center, watching her mother teach a group of teenagers how to create sustainable fashion from recycled materials. Isabella's hands moved with the same graceful precision they'd always had, but now they worked without the tremor of illness, without the urgency of someone running out of time. The surgery had been more successful than anyone dared hope. Not only had Dr. Martinez and her team at Children's Hospital saved Isabella's kidneys, but they'd discovered that what appeared to be advanced cancer was actually an aggressive but treatable infection that had been misdiagnosed for months. Isabella would need ongoing care, but she was no longer dying, she was thriving. Miss Sofia, called Marcus Williams, the boy whose father's cancer treatment had nearly bankrupted his family before Sterling's network stole his artwork. Marcus was now one of the first scholarship recipients of the Creative Protection Fund that had grown out of Sofia's viral broadcast. "My graphic novel just got accepted by a real publisher, and they're paying me a fair contract." Sofia smiled, watching Marcus show his artwork to the other kids in the program. 6 months ago, he'd been another victim of systematic exploitation. Now he was a published artist with legal representation provided by the fund's advocacy network. "Sofia," came a familiar voice behind her, "there's someone here to see you." Sofia turned to find Tyler Brennan, the teenager who'd first filmed her in the subway station and inadvertently sparked the investigation that brought down Mrs. Hartford. But Tyler looked different now, more serious, more purposeful. "Tyler? What are you doing here?" "I'm here as a reporter," Tyler said, holding up a small recording device. "I'm doing a follow-up story on the families affected by Operation Clean Slate. My journalism teacher said my series on corporate exploitation of vulnerable communities might win a state award." Sofia laughed, remembering the boy who'd originally filmed her to mock her handmade shoes. "That's amazing, Tyler. How many families have been helped so far?" 87 families have received full restitution from Sterling's network, Tyler said, consulting his notes with professional seriousness. The Creative Protection Fund has provided legal assistance to over 200 families nationwide. And 3 states have passed legislation requiring waiting periods and independent legal review for any intellectual property contracts involving families in medical or financial crisis. Sophia felt pride swelling in her chest. Her voice, the voice of a 9-year-old girl defending her mother's creativity, had created legal protections that would safeguard other families for generations. But the best part, Tyler continued, is what happened to Sterling himself. What do you mean? He's not just in federal prison. The judge sentenced him to teach art classes to underprivileged kids as part of his community service when he gets out. He's going to spend 5 years learning what creativity actually means to the communities he exploited. Sophia looked through the community center windows, where Sterling's former victims were now teaching their skills to younger children, creating a cycle of protection and empowerment that would be much harder to break than individual families standing alone. Tyler, can I ask you something? Sure. When you first filmed me in the subway station, why did you do it? What were you really thinking? Tyler was quiet for a moment, his youthful arrogance replaced by something more thoughtful. Honestly, I was making fun of someone I thought was different from me. Someone I thought was less than me because she looked poor. And now? Now I understand that the people we dismiss as powerless are often the ones brave enough to tell the truth when everyone else is too scared or too comfortable to speak up. Through the community center's main door, Eduardo emerged with a group of construction workers who'd been volunteering their time to expand the building. Her father looked different too. The shame and desperation that had driven him to gambling had been replaced by purposeful activity and the dignity of honest work. Sophia. Eduardo called out. The new workshop space is finished. Your mom wants to show you something. Sophia followed her father inside, where Isabella stood in front of a wall display that took Sophia's breath away. Dozens of pairs of shoes lined the walls, each one handmade, each one unique, each one created by a family who'd found economic stability through the sustainable fashion cooperative Isabella had started with her settlement money from Sterling's network. Mija, Isabella said, her voice strong and warm, do you remember what I told you about putting a piece of your soul into everything you create with your hands? Yes, Mom. Look around this room. Every pair of shoes represents a family that refused to let their creativity be stolen. Every stitch represents someone who learned they have value that can't be bought or sold or exploited. Sophia walked along the wall, reading the small plaques beside each pair of shoes. The Martinez family's work boots, designed for construction workers with arch support problems. The Johnson family's children's sneakers that grew with kids' feet to reduce waste. The Chin family's elegant dress shoes made entirely from upcycled materials. It's beautiful, Mom. It's more than beautiful, Isabella said. It's proof that when we protect creativity instead of exploiting it, everyone benefits. Detective Santos appeared in the doorway, now dressed in civilian clothes and carrying a folder that Sophia recognized as another case file. Sophia, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have news about the investigation. Good news or bad news? Good news. Mrs. Hartford's testimony helped us identify and prosecute 17 other educators who were part of the exploitation network. All of them have been convicted, and all of them are required to pay restitution to their victims. What about Mrs. Hartford? She's serving 2 years in minimum security prison, followed by 5 years of supervised community service. She'll be teaching literacy classes to adults who never learned to read properly. Sophia considered this. Mrs. Hartford would spend years helping people develop the exact skills she'd once used to manipulate and exploit families. There was justice in that, not just punishment, but transformation. Detective Santos, can I ask you something? Of course. How many other networks like Sterling's are still operating? Detective Santos's expression grew serious. Probably dozens. Corporate exploitation of vulnerable communities is a systemic problem that goes far beyond intellectual property theft. So this isn't over. This particular fight is over. But the bigger fight, the fight for systems that protect people instead of exploiting them, that's going to take a lot longer. Sophia nodded, understanding that her victory had been one battle in a much larger war. But she also understood something else: she was no longer fighting alone. Detective Santos, the Creative Protection Fund is expanding. We're not just helping families with intellectual property issues anymore. What do you mean? We're helping families recognize and resist all kinds of exploitation, medical debt schemes, predatory lending, educational fraud, housing scams. Sophia's voice was getting stronger as she spoke. We're teaching people to ask questions, demand transparency, and never sign anything when they're desperate. That's ambitious for a 9-year-old. I'm 10 now, Sophia corrected with a smile. And I'm not doing it alone. Through the workshop window, Sophia could see the evening crowd gathering for their weekly community meeting, families who'd been helped by the fund, teenagers learning sustainable design skills, older adults sharing traditional crafts with younger generations, and local business owners who'd committed to fair practices in their hiring and contracting. Mayor Rodriguez appeared in the workshop, looking tired but satisfied. Over the past 6 months, he'd become a genuine ally rather than a political opportunist, using his office to support legislation protecting vulnerable families and holding regular forums where community members could voice concerns about corporate exploitation. Sophia, Mayor Rodriguez said, I have someone with me who'd like to meet you. Behind him stood a woman Sophia didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed, but with kind eyes that suggested she was here as a friend rather than another authority figure trying to manage the situation. Sophia, this is Dr. Carmen Ruiz from the University of California. She's been following your story and she has a proposition for you. Dr. Ruiz stepped forward with a warm smile. Sophia, I direct a program that trains young people to become advocates for social justice. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship to attend our Summer Institute for Emerging Leaders. How young do the leaders have to be? Usually high school age, but we're making an exception for someone who's already proven she can create systemic change. Sophia looked around the workshop at the shoes representing families who'd refused to be exploited, at her mother who was alive and healthy and teaching others, at her father who'd found dignity in honest work, at the community that had rallied around their family and stayed to help others. Dr. Ruiz, I'm honored by the offer, but I think I'm already doing the work I'm meant to do. What do you mean? I mean this, Sophia gestured around the room, is my university. These families are my teachers. And the kids who are still being exploited by people like Sterling, they're the ones I'm supposed to help. Dr. Ruiz smiled. Sophia, what if we brought the university to you? What if we created a satellite program right here in this community center, training local advocates while you continue your work here? Sophia felt excitement building in her chest. You'd do that? I'd do that. Because sometimes the best laboratories for social change aren't in academic institutions, they're in communities where people are actively fighting for justice. Isabella stepped beside her daughter, placing a hand on Sophia's shoulder. Mija, what do you think? Sophia looked at her mother, seeing pride and love and the quiet strength that had been forged in survival and refined by victory. I think Mrs. Hartford was wrong about a lot of things, Sophia said slowly. But she was right about one thing: education is important. The difference is, real education teaches you to protect yourself and others, not just to follow rules made by people who don't care about you. Sophia turned to Dr. Ruiz. I'd like to accept your offer, but I have conditions. What kind of conditions? The program has to be free for any kid whose family has been exploited by corporations. The classes have to be taught in English and Spanish. And every student has to spend time working directly with families who need help, not just studying theory. Dr. Ruiz's smile widened. Done. Sophia, I think you're going to revolutionize how we think about advocacy training. As the evening community meeting began and the workshop filled with families sharing their stories and supporting each other's struggles, Sophia realized that her journey from humiliated student to community advocate had taught her something fundamental about power. Real power wasn't about having authority over others, it was about using your voice to amplify the voices of people who were still being silenced. Real victory wasn't about defeating individual villains like Sterling and Mrs. Hartford, it was about creating systems that made it harder for future villains to operate. Real change wasn't about becoming famous or winning awards, it was about building communities where everyone's creativity was protected and everyone's dignity was respected. Sophia stood in the middle of the community center that had grown from her family's crisis, surrounded by people who'd learned to resist exploitation because one 9-year-old girl had refused to be ashamed of shoes made with love. Her mother was alive and healthy, teaching others the skills that had once been stolen from her. Her father had found redemption through honest work and community service. The families who'd been exploited had received justice and support. The systems that had enabled the exploitation were being dismantled and rebuilt. And across the country, other children facing similar crises now had resources, legal protection, and the knowledge that their voices mattered. But perhaps most importantly, Sophia had learned that speaking truth to power wasn't a one-time act of courage, it was a daily choice to stand up for people who couldn't yet stand up for themselves. As the meeting began and families shared their victories and struggles, Sophia stood to address the crowd. 6 months ago, my teacher made fun of my shoes because they were homemade, Sophia said, her voice carrying easily across the room. She thought poverty was something to be ashamed of. She thought creativity was something to be stolen. She thought children like me didn't have voices worth hearing. Sophia paused, looking around at the faces of people who'd become family through shared struggle and mutual support. But we've proven her wrong about everything. We've proven that poverty doesn't diminish dignity. We've proven that creativity belongs to the people who create it. And we've proven that when children speak truth, adults have a responsibility to listen. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sophia wasn't finished. The work isn't done. Somewhere tonight, there's a kid being told their family's creativity isn't valuable. Somewhere tonight, there's a family being pressured to sign away their future because they're desperate to save someone they love. Somewhere tonight, there's a teacher or a corporation or a government official who thinks vulnerable people exist to be exploited. Sophia's voice grew stronger, carrying the authority of someone who'd faced down predators and won. But also somewhere tonight, there's a kid who's learning that their voice matters. There's a family that's learning to ask questions and demand transparency. There's a community that's learning to protect its members instead of abandoning them. Sophia smiled, feeling the weight and joy of purpose that would shape the rest of her life. And tomorrow, we're going to make sure there are more families in the second group than the first. As the applause echoed through the community center and people began sharing their own stories of resistance and recovery, Sophia understood that her greatest victory wasn't saving her own family, it was proving that ordinary people, including children, had the power to create extraordinary change when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The shoes her mother had made with love were still sitting by Sophia's backpack, worn but sturdy, beautiful in their imperfection. They'd carried her through the worst crisis of her young life and into a future where her voice would continue to matter. And every step she took in those shoes would remind her that the most powerful thing anyone could wear was the courage to speak truth, especially when speaking truth felt dangerous. Because sometimes, when you're brave enough to defend love against people who profit from desperation, you discover that love is the most powerful force in the world. And love, once awakened in a community, could never be exploited again. What did this story teach you about the power of standing up for what's right, even when you're young and feel powerless? About how speaking truth can create ripples of change that protect entire communities. Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world. Sophia's journey from a girl ashamed of her handmade shoes to a young advocate protecting families from exploitation reminds us that courage doesn't require age, authority, or resources, it only requires the willingness to speak truth when others choose silence. Her story echoes the experiences of countless children who face systems designed to dismiss their voices, yet who find the strength to stand up not just for themselves, but for others who cannot yet stand alone. In a world where vulnerability is often seen as an opportunity for profit, Sophia's victory represents something deeper than individual justice. It represents the possibility that communities can choose protection over exploitation, dignity over desperation, and love over the systems that seek to commodify human creativity and pain. The shoes that began as a source of shame became symbols of resistance, proof that the most beautiful things in life are often those created with love rather than purchased with money, and that true value lies not in what we can afford, but in what we're willing to fight to protect.